I'm gonna hit record, and I think we're off to the races. How's everybody doing in the chat? Anybody have good stories you want to share? Any events? Any news since last week? Any good stories? Chat? Question mark? Nothing, eh? All right. Boring weekend. Yeah, that's kind of how weekends go these days. You know, you can't expect too much out of a weekend during the old COVID-19. Although I feel like today in particular was nice. Did you guys enjoy today? Were you able to go out at all? Yeah. Yeah, like today was the first time I've seen the sun in a while, or maybe I'm exaggerating, but it felt that way. And the horrible, I mean, I like the snow when it falls, but when it turns into like gray lumps all over the place, not so much fun. So all that horrible stuff started to melt, right? It was really spectacular. You know, obviously there's still snow on the ground, but yeah, today was a special day, I'm gonna go out and say. And did I bring it up last time? Chinese New Year happened between last class and this class, right? You guys pay attention to that kind of thing? So is that true? Am I exaggerating? Maybe my sense of time is a little bit off. Today's the 16th, right? When was our last class? The 9th? Yeah, it was between last class and this class. It was like Thursday or Friday. Yeah, it was Thursday in China, Friday here. So anyways, for that calendar, that means spring has started. And again, if we had talked about this on Friday, that might not make sense. But talking about it today, it kind of almost makes some sense, right? It feels a little bit like spring, doesn't it? So anyways, today we got some Buddhism to talk about. Why don't we take a peek at the syllabus just so we're all like aware of what is happening in the world. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but it's good to peek at the syllabus every now and then. So yeah, we are right here, right? 16th. We're kind of right in the middle of the life of the Buddha. We read a big chunk of it for today. We're not quite done. We will finish it next week though. So hopefully you've been enjoying it. You know, as you can tell, it's not the longest of books, but yeah, we're gonna finish it off next time. Today, we will talk about what I'm calling the Dharma, which basically is just referring to the Buddha's teachings. Maybe remember that from the first day, we talked about that a little bit. And so today, Keanu Reeves will achieve enlightenment, which is also very exciting. And then next time, we'll talk about death and also nuns and monks. And I guess monks will be after that. And then we'll have an exam, right? So things move pretty quickly in this class. We only meet once a week. And so no assignments between now and the exam, but the exam will be Tuesday the 2nd. So mark your calendars, it's on the way. I will give you a review sheet before next class, so you know what is coming. I'll tell you all the important things that I want you to focus on. I will make the review sheet based on the slides. I haven't made it yet, but it'll be based on the slides. The slides obviously are what I think are most important from the reading. They link up very carefully, closely with the reading. I do that on purpose because it gives you guys a key to unlock the door of the reading, right? If you look through the slides and you don't understand something, you can go back to the reading and look it up, right? So anyways, all of the different pieces of the class, the discussion, the slides, the reading should all fit together, and it will all come together for this exam. The exam will be in class, and it will not take up the entire class period. It will take an hour and 15 minutes. I will probably do some review and cover some of this material. As you can see, there's a reading. It's just the way things shake out. Maybe you don't need to know this, but there's another section of the class that meets twice a week. And so I had to kind of link this class up with that class. I know it's a little bit awkward to have reading due on the day of the exam, but I promise I won't hammer you with details from that reading. And so then we can do a review. We can talk about any questions you have, and then you can take the exam. How's that sound? Questions about all this? I know it's weird to be already talking about exams, but again, we only meet once a week, so we gotta keep our eyes on the calendar. And obviously, if you ever have a question, just let me know. Moodle also has many answers. So last time we went through the life of the Buddha. We covered a lot of ground, right? We just did Life of the Buddha the whole time. And this time we will actually break it up into two pieces, right? We'll continue with the Life of the Buddha, but then we'll go more deeply into his teachings. This is just a review slide. Again, some of the things we saw before, we saw a vow, right? We talked about vows. What was the Buddha's primordial vow, this vow that he took some many lifetimes ago, and then he repeated again in his penultimate life, the life before he came onto earth? What was this vow all about? I know it feels like we haven't talked about this stuff in a while, but it was only last class. Steven, do you remember? To end suffering, yeah. And not just for himself, right? In the movie, I don't know if you could understand. The little kid came out and he was born and he walked and the flowers came up. Remember that? This ringing a bell? Yeah. And then he said something that you probably couldn't quite understand, but it's something like, I have come to end suffering and free beings from suffering, something like that. And so that's the vow we also see in this book. It echoes really throughout his many lives. He has this vow and it really kind of keeps him going, right? This commitment, this promise that he makes early on. And then over many, many lifetimes, he's performing positive actions, good karma, merit, virtue, all of that sort of stuff. And then finally, there's this final lifetime of awakening, which is, of course, what we've been focusing on. Hopefully these terms are all clear now. I know it's kind of a lot of names, but with important people like the Buddha, like Jesus, like Muhammad, there are many ways to talk about them. And here are just a few, right? So when he was a prince, his name was Siddhartha, right? That should be pretty clear by now. In the movie, that's what they call him. And when Keanu Reeves comes out and he's riding on an elephant and everybody's gathered around, they're all calling him Siddhartha and they all love him. So that's a good name to know. But after he achieves enlightenment, obviously he's the Buddha, Bodhisattva. He's on the path to enlightenment, right? It's a being that's striving. Remember, I wrote on the board, enlightenment being. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty clear. This we got to also last time, but then we ran out of time. We mostly covered it though, as far as I remember. The Buddha saw the four sights, right? Or the Buddha to be saw the four sights, which this is a new way of phrasing it. I just wrote this recently, but it's an intimate encounter with the inevitable sufferings of life, right? So what were these four sights? What did he see? What were at least three of the sights? Maybe that's.
I think one of them was a sick man.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was old.
Sick man, old man. And?
Dead body or dead man.
Dead man. Yeah, we could say person too. I suppose that might be gender neutral. It's not totally clear what gender these figures were. And then what's the fourth person?
Was he like
Holy man.
yeah.
Holy man. Yeah, let's say holy person. Yeah, exactly. So these are the four sights, right? And we talked about this. One question I ask you is, why is a poor person not included in this list? Why is a poor person not included in this list? Isn't being poor the root of all suffering in this country? It sort of reminds me of back in the good old days when you could ride the subway. No, you can still ride the subway. But there would be this ad I would see sometimes, which would sort of piss me off. It was for some like vitamin or something called Hims. Have you guys ever heard of this before or seen this ad that I'm talking about? And it takes, I forget even what it was, but some sort of biological issue, let's say, and it'd say, that's optional. So like, male pattern baldness, that's optional. Erectile dysfunction, that's optional. Whatever, just something that, really gets at particularly men, right? I imagine there's probably a hers that maybe I'm not as bothered by, but the Hims for some reason did bother me quite a bit. And by saying that that's optional, the implication is what? If you buy this product, you will be able to avoid all of these various sufferings. We could use kind of Buddhist language for them, right? And there's some truth to that, right? It's not totally off, right? When we talk about aging and sickness, right? If you can pay for it, and if the American taxpayers will pay for it, you can get the Regeneron special soup that'll fix the COVID right up, and then, you'll be back on your feet in a few days, right? You know what I'm talking about here. And so there is a sense, if you can pay for it, you can be well. You can get rid of your wrinkles with Botox. You can augment whatever feature you want to augment, right? You can take care of all of these issues that the Buddha seems to be pointing out, right? If you have money, you'll be fine. At least that's for a while, but not forever, right? So why isn't a poor person included here in these 4 sites? Stephen? Maybe. How is being poor different from being sick or old or dead?
Maybe it's not inevitable.
It's not inevitable. I like that. Kevin, what were you saying? Inevitability? Yeah. Everybody will get sick. I know it sounds a little weird to say it this way, but it's true, right? At least once in your life, you will get sick, right? Some people get more sick than others, blah, blah. Everybody will get old. I like to think of myself as a relatively young man, but I gotta say, I'm starting to feel the creaks in my body. I did get out today because the sun was out, but it was the first time I was able to exercise in like a couple weeks. And again, it's like my knees popping. I was sort of still feeling it, right? And so, yeah, old age will creep up on all of you. You can make it look like it's not bothering you. You can make a lot of these things go away. You can get knee surgery if you hurt your knee, right? How amazing is that? But still, at the end of the day, you will get old and you will fall apart. It's inevitable, right? There's no question. It will happen. And then finally, of course, death, the big death word. It's kind of a frightening topic. It's something we're going to talk about a lot in this class, right? A big part of Buddhism is to think about death and the way death might affect you. And as we can see from the life story of the Buddha, it was this encounter with death and all these sort of related problems, these inevitable problems, these problems that afflict us all, like you're saying. That's what changed his life, right? That's what turned things around for him. So very good. And then finally, the holy person, what's his deal? Why does he matter?
Like when the Buddha Siddhartha was like noticing all these things for the first time, he saw this one person, they were affected by any of these thoughts or like negative things that he was thinking about. So sort of like a spark for him to like want to know what he wants to know, like kind of make him think about like sort of.
It's almost like that commercial on the subway, right? It's like, that's optional. Suffer it. It's optional. And so the Buddha, yeah, I'm sort of being an idiot, but yeah, exactly. The Buddha saw this guy who seemed to be unaffected by all the suffering around him, and he thought, okay, let's see what that guy knows, right? He followed after him, and I don't know if we went into this in total detail, but maybe it's worth paying some attention to right now, because what we'll do today, we'll get into more philosophical topics, and a lot of what Buddhism is a response to these practices that he was trying out during this period in his life. I think I asked you this last time, but we didn't spend much time on it. How can you use meditation to cope with pain or with suffering? You guys meditate? Have you ever meditated before? Any meditators in the room? Chat, you guys meditate? Meditation? No meditators? Okay, some meditating. Gaia, who said I have? Any of you meditated before? Why do people meditate? What does it do for you? Just get stressed out, right? Yeah, I mean, if we think about the sufferings of our lives, it's not necessarily going to be death and old age and all this other horrible stuff that the Buddha was encountering, but I think, if I opened the floor to air your sufferings after we got to know each other a little bit better, you would have some things to talk about. Would you guys agree with me? Oh, yeah, right? People are struggling right now. I mean, again, I don't know you guys' specific situations, but I think in general, like whatever was sort of stressing you out this time last year, it has been ratcheted up to a 10, or at least to an 8 or a 9 or something, right? Things are just more stressful. And again, some people have it harder than others. Some people are very directly affected by COVID. You know, I'm listening to these podcasts talking about these really horrible stories. Some people are very indirectly affected. And that doesn't mean one person's suffering is necessarily worse than the other, right? We are all dealing with some major stress right now. And what can you do about it? Well, you can get on Netflix and watch that Headspace mindfulness series. You guys know what I'm talking about? So I got orange cartoon characters and it kind of sucks you in. Has anybody actually watched it? I watched it before the semester started. It just came out, right? Like a month ago or something. And I was thinking like, oh, this might be good for class. And maybe we'll talk about it. Today's not really meditation day. We'll get into more meditation later. But it's an interesting glimpse of what meditation has become in America. You know, it's basically like a mindfulness app, you know. It's called Headspace. So if you are interested, it is on Netflix, and it's got sort of this soothing British voice in the background. I don't even know what the guy's last name is. They just call him Andy, I think. And the art is sort of nicely done. And it's basically like, hey, you're probably stressed out. Watch this thing and it'll help you be less stressed out, right? And that's kind of what the Buddha was actually playing with here. You know, I know these are Buddhist techniques. And so it's not to say that he totally rejects these practices. It's just he doesn't stop with these practices. Does that make sense? It's kind of the beginning of Buddhism in a way. So, you know, what would he do? Obviously, he would not have the soothing British voice of Andy in his head, but he would also focus on his breath, focus on his happy place, right? So, I mean, if you look at the image of the Buddha, his ribs are all sticking out, his arms are like atrophied, his body is just falling apart. Do you think he's comfortable? Of course not, right? Almost certainly not. He looks like he's just in pain, just sitting there, right? So how does he deal with this pain? Is by going into this headspace, right? By going into his happy place, by imagining something happy, by imagining a comfortable way of being, by focusing on his mind rather than his body, right? Mind over matter, that sort of thing. Getting deeper and deeper and deeper into his consciousness. At least that's the way the story goes. Lots of stories about this, like how he can send his consciousness out like a bird and fly over all over the place, that kind of thing. But inevitably, the suffering comes back, right? He says, this too will not lead to liberation from suffering. Why not? Why do these practices not lead to liberation from suffering? Why does the sweet voice of Andy on Headspace not lead to liberation from suffering?
It's almost like a form of avoidance, like you meditate to cope, but it doesn't solve the actual problems that are outside of this headspace.
Very nice. Yeah. So Alexandra is saying it's a way to cope. And Aiden is saying you're eventually going to wake up the next morning and your problems are still going to be there. And these are both exactly right. It's not to say this is a worthless activity, though. I don't mean to poo-poo it too prematurely, right? It is a useful activity. If you feel overwhelmed, meditation is actually very helpful, right? The problem is whatever is causing your problem will still remain. You guys see what I'm saying? I see some heads nodding. All right, I'll take that as a yes. And so therein lies the trick, right? Meditation is actually, this kind of meditation has gotten quite a bit of criticism recently, at least in like academic circles. And one reason for it is just like Alexander's saying, just like Aiden's saying, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, right? It just lets you deal with it. And so this is an issue, right? This is an issue. And the Buddha, of course, is grappling with these issues. So he sees that it will not solve his problems. We get to this driftwood analogy, and I know we read this together, and I think by that point it's pretty late and we were all pretty tired. You guys remember going through this? So now we have more energy, right? We're more excited to be here. We don't have to read it again, but again, this idea that desire is the problem, right? So rather than thinking all he has to do is listen to British Andy's soothing voice, now he's thinking, I need to root out the causes of my problems, right? Rather than just sort of escaping from them, I need to cease their cause. And so he thinks all desire is the problem. We discussed what would it be like to get rid of all desire. Remember that? And is that a very appealing way to live? To live without any desire? We went over this, didn't we? We did, right?
I think we said no because it doesn't. The like desire would be like wanting to eat, like not eating.
Yeah.
Very comfortable. Like,
Exactly. It's absurd, right? And so, in a way, this whole story is absurd. Have you guys noticed that, right? This life story of the Buddha. It takes things a little bit too far. And of course, that's sort of the point, right? Is it saying, well, okay, let's say, the cause of our problem is not Zuckerberg or Bezos or whatever thing that we usually want to point to and say that's the cause of our problems. The cause of our problem is us. It's our desire. We need to deal with it. We need to get rid of our desires in order to liberate ourselves from suffering. But if we take this to its logical extreme, which is exactly what's happening in this story, we end up in an absurd place, just like Stephen was saying, right? We end up in a place where you don't have any will to live, right? You end up in a place where you're basically a corpse sitting there, right? And he, in fact, does not fully liberate himself from suffering. Maybe you're thinking, okay, why doesn't he just commit suicide, right? If he's so tired of being alive. And, that's obviously an uncomfortable topic, but why not? Why in the Buddhist view is suicide not going to solve these problems for the Buddha? Yes, exactly. Yeah. So within this worldview, right, death is not an escape. Death is not the end. Death is just a new beginning. And like Kyla was saying, it will probably be worse. Yeah, exactly. And you've probably heard this sort of thing. I think in Catholic tradition, there's something very similar, where if you kill anyone, including yourself, that is a problem, right? That is a bad deed. And so it will send you straight down. And again, we'll discuss this a bit more. What is going on with the Buddha at this time, this idea of desire as a problem, and how does the Buddha kind of ultimately solve this problem? Because again, if we stopped here, it'd be sort of a Debbie Downer, sad face story. But he figures it out, right? So don't worry, folks. We're gonna get there. Now, this is where we stopped last time, right? He ultimately comes upon a middle way, and I even have a video for it. I feel like we have a lot of slides today. Should we watch the video? You guys want to watch the video? Let's watch the video. All right, it's nighttime. I feel like there's nothing wrong with a little video. All right, so I'm gonna pause the recording and sort of see some differences. And one difference, for example, is the scene with Sujata, right? In the film version, she just offers some normal food, but if we open up our books and turn to page, what was it? I wrote 49 here, but no, it's actually the next chapter. It starts with, Sujata's gift. On 53, for example, the beginning of chapter 8, I know some people have ebooks. But Sujata offers this gift, and I see you're all still opening your stuff up, so I'll just read it to you. The gods show up, right? Again, the gods are sort of left out from this story, but the gods show up again. Indra is one of the gods. He summons this village woman named Sujata. She skims the milk of 1,000 cows 7 times, mixed fresh rice and grain into the cream, and boiled it. Within the mixture, the endless knot and other good luck signs clearly appeared, filling Sujata with joy because of these signs of her, blah, 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 blah. And she would achieve the nectar of immortality. So a little hyperbole for us there. Have you guys ever seen the endless knot before? It looks something like this. Let's see if I can draw it. It's, let's see, and then I'll go like that. All right, yeah. Sorry. Yes, and then like that. This is going to be a janky endless knot, but you'll get the idea. Okay, that's pretty good, actually. So there are 8 auspicious symbols in Buddhism, really across the board, and so it's very common to see these in auspicious places. Do you guys know the word auspicious? That's a nice word. Auspicious. Have you ever heard this term before? It means like good luck, good fortune. It's a sign of good things to come, right? And so when it comes to prophecies and predictions, which are a big part, we've already seen it. It's a part of the Buddha's life. It's part of Buddhism across the board. Later, we'll read more about what people are calling Buddhist magic. And so in those traditions of like divination and prediction and that sort of thing, something that is auspicious, just like the sign, would also be a sign of good fortune and good things to come. So in any case, as we saw in the scene here, just like before, there are gods, there is this milk. Wait, I lost it. Where'd it go? There it is. Yeah, this milk that's coming from 1,000 cows, and it's being boiled down into this delicious cream. And then they compare it to this nectar of immortality, right? So it's not just your average food that's just being offered by some village girl, right? What she offered to Keanu didn't look so appetizing, but it's like the best of the best, the creme de la creme, right? Quite literally. And so here the Buddha eats and he gains strength, right? And so it should be pretty clear because we just watched it in the movie. But the middle way, right? Any questions on this whole middle way thing? Is that pretty clear? So the Buddha comes across this middle way and his friends reject him, right? All of his friends are like, oh, this guy's going soft. He's eating food, taking a bath. What's wrong with this guy, right? And so they go off and leave him alone. So eventually the Buddha makes his way to the Bodhi tree, which is in a place called Bodh Gaya. It's a place in kind of the central part of India. And you can go there now, and there's a big tree that people say is the descendant of the tree that the Buddha really sat under. So it's basically become like a pilgrimage site / tourism site. It's kind of both, honestly, and pilgrimage and tourism are kind of similar things when you think about it. So in any case, you can't see it so well in this picture, but there's this tree that he's sitting under. One reason I picked this image is because it's from a cave in Dunhuang. Maybe you probably haven't heard of Dunhuang, but it's a place in China where a bunch of old books were hidden, and then they were revealed like a millennium later. They're hidden in the beginning of the 11th century, and then they were found at the beginning of the 20th century. There are all these old books, old cave paintings, and all this cool stuff. And it's also one of the earliest depictions of a gun. I read about this, and I was like, oh, I'll use that in class. So maybe you can tell there's fire coming out of the end of this stick, and so it's using gunpowder to fire some sort of projectile. These are all a bunch of demons who are attacking the Buddha, and then you also have some fair maidens at the bottom. So it doesn't look maybe as impressive on this image here, but of course Hollywood did a number on this scene as well, and we can enjoy that too. But since we just watched a clip, maybe we can talk the book for a little while. So the Buddha finds this middle way, and I guess, again, so we're all on the same page. What is the middle way between? What are the two extremes that we found the middle of? Yeah, excellent. So asceticism. They said that in the movie, right? They talked about the ascetics. Again, that's the top of the slide, asceticism. So that kind of harsh lifestyle, that lifestyle of extreme discipline, right? That's what asceticism means. So a middle way between this extreme discipline and what we could call extreme indulgence, maybe, right? Like the early part of his life where he's having a good time. He found a middle way between them. His body was strong, and he was ready to vanquish the demon Mara at the foot of the Bodhi tree. So who is Mara? Have we talked about Mara yet? We have not talked about Mara, have we? So who's Mara? As you can see here, he's a demon, right? So what's Mara's deal? Yeah,
in the story, he has like an army of demons. So I think like he's like a notable demon.
He's a notable demon, yeah. And so one way to think about him, because again, we've got, let's see, I think I have one of these here. We've got this wheel of life, right? So he's got to fit somewhere on the wheel of life. You might be thinking, oh, he's probably like Satan coming up from hell. And he is a lot like Satan, but he's not coming up from hell. He's a god. He's this sort of low-level god who plays tricks on people, rather than helping them, right? Gods don't necessarily have to be good. You know, maybe they had to be good in a previous life, but now that they're gods, they're kind of riding on that previous karma that sent them up there. And so Mara, he's like Satan in the way that he is a creator of illusions, let's say, right? He tricks people, he fools people, he deludes people, he makes people think that things are one way and then they turn out to be another. But yeah, when we think, what is he in terms of kind of Buddhist cosmology, he really is just like a low-level god. Another way to think about him is a demon. I think that's also fine too. If you kind of look at the history of what the word demon means, it's not too far off actually. Demon's kind of like this spirit creature that then was demonized. Okay, so there's all this threatening stuff that happens. Why don't we watch this too? I know we just watched a clip, but I think this will be good. And then as you're watching it, you can think about some discussion questions. And then we can discuss. So let's pause this. This will actually be the last clip that we watch. And as you watch, think about what is enlightenment? Because this is the scene where Keanu achieves enlightenment. He had found this middle way that kind of set him up for it, right? And then finally, this is where the great climax of the story occurs. What is enlightenment? What is Siddhartha overcoming in order to become the awakened one, the Buddha? What does he gain? And then what happens next too? Okay, so we'll look at those questions again in a moment, but why don't we watch this last clip here, then we can get into discussion time. Oh, and I think I've told you this before. These kids are a little while. I know you're probably all itching for a break soon, but it's almost 8 o'clock. We go until 9:35. So let's try to push until like 8:15. I find actually the second half we're even sleepier than the first. So maybe we can even push deeper into 8 o'clock, into the eighth hour, if we can. If we can't, then we'll take the break when we're ready to. It's a struggle. But all right, so breakout rooms, entertain us. What do you guys talk about? What is enlightenment? I was not able to join any breakout rooms because we had a nice conversation in here. Don't be shy. Enlightenment. I think there's a Justin Bieber lyric where he says that he doesn't believe in nirvana, and I forget what he rhymes with nirvana. And it's sort of an interesting lyric, right? Because it makes me think, it's like, you actually do kind of need to believe in nirvana in order for Buddhism to really make sense. There's a lot of belief involved for this thing to work. So Gaia says a middle way. I think that's a good start, although we watched 2 different video clips, right? And the first one, he figures out the middle way. Is he enlightened yet when he figures out the middle way? Not really. He's sort of setting himself up, right? It's basically like he's figured out a way to actually like come to class and stay awake and feed himself and have enough energy to learn and all that sort of thing. But he hasn't quite done all the learning yet, right? He hasn't quite figured it all out. Achieved understanding, inner peace. All right, those are also good starts. Let's get more specific. So in the movie, what obstacles did Siddhartha overcome? So there are 3 scenes, right? And this is a good way we can think about it. That first scene, you've got the Victoria's Secret scene going on, right? And obviously, I already pointed this out, but there are some gender issues happening there, and so we're going to talk about that in more detail next week. But we can also talk about it this week. These women are being depicted as temptresses. So how do you think Buddhists, following in this tradition, how do you think they start to feel about women in general? How do Buddhists look at women as a result of this story? Yeah. Yeah, women are just so attractive, right? It's like they're always offering themselves to us men and just causing so many problems for us. We just need women to leave us alone, and then we can finally achieve enlightenment, right? That's all we want. Yeah, it's true. And if you look at uh, other stories beyond these early Indian stories in Tibet and China and Japan, all across the board, right? Misogyny kind of follows with Buddhism. Do you guys know this word, misogyny? Misogyny. Yeah. And so it's worth thinking about. We made a comparison to Christianity in this class, and we could find parallels in our own society, right? Like, why are young women not allowed to wear like revealing clothing in high school or something like that, right? This is a very gendered critique, right? Because it's very distracting to all the other students, just like it's very distracting to the Buddha. And so there is this sense that women are there to distract men. Now, we can sort of see this from two perspectives, right? I encourage you to live your life this way. Actually, a lot of problems in America could be solved with this idea of double vision, right? With this idea of being able to see things from two sides. We can understand the logic, right? The kind of where this Buddha story is coming from. If I were a monk and I shaved my head and I wore weird clothing and I was, just so we're all on the same page, I'm not supposed to have sex, right? If I'm a monk, I'm not supposed to have sex. I would see women as this kind of weird other, wouldn't I? And so as we think about these stories and where they come from, that's where they come from, right? They start to see women as this weird other that they need to stay away from, that's maybe even threatening. And there are rules that develop that monks are not supposed to ever touch women. They're just supposed to stay away from women. Women are kind of seen as lower than men. But again, we'll see a story next week that kind of reimagines that relationship. So it's not all misogyny all the way, although I encourage you to look for it when it is there, or to see it when it's there. Okay, so he overcame Mara, he overcame temptation, he overcame fear, overcame temptation, Mara's daughters, illusions. Yeah, so exactly. So that first scene, if we think about what's going on there, obviously there's all the misogyny that we were just talking about. There's also desire, right? And I think one reason, again, if we have this double vision from the outside, we can kind of see it as misogyny. From the inside, what is going on here? It is the strongest desire, right? I don't know if you all would necessarily say this if we took a poll of the room, what is the strongest desire in human history? But if you study like biology, Darwin, all that sort of thing, what is like this drive that pushes creatures to live and then move and just the world to turn is this very specific sexual desire, right? It's basically like one thread that ties almost all organisms on this planet together. Sex, right? It's a big thing. And so I think to show any other desire here would be, it wouldn't be as strong, right? This is the strongest desire. And so the Buddha, he's not just sort of choking it down and pushing it down and just saying, okay, don't look, don't look, don't look, right? He is just totally uninterested, right? He has overcome these desires. They just don't well up in him anymore. And again, if we bring in biological ideas, that's pretty amazing, right? Because I don't know about you guys, these are very powerful things, right? They really dominate our lives in a lot of ways. And so for him to not feel any sense of sexual desire, it's almost like he's become a new species of some kind, right? And in a way he has. He's not really a human anymore after he achieves enlightenment. He's kind of become something else. He's not a god, he's not a human, he's sort of something else. Okay, that's the first one. What about the second scene? What does he overcome in the second scene? That's the one we kind of skipped through. It moves very slowly. It was supposed to be like, look at all of our CGI technology. And of course, all of us are very uninterested in seeing that now. Even like, it was before like Lord of the Rings, right? Lord of the Rings, you had these amazing like army scenes and stuff like that. This one is kind of tame by comparison. Although, you know, it was cool. They shoot the fire arrows and, you know, Keanu is just sitting there with his very nice posture, right? You notice how good his posture was? Very nice posture. And he was just not afraid, right? So I guess I sort of just answered my own question. I wanted you guys to say it. But what would you say he overcame in this particular scene? We could say it's sort of like desire, but I think we can get more specific than that. What did he overcome in the second scene? Fear, yeah. And there's kind of a classic trio that causes problems in Buddhism. If you read Kyon carefully for today, maybe you remember seeing it. We'll come across it again. But it really is kind of a greed or a lust, like a negative desire is what he came over in the first one. The second one is fear, but also anger and hatred, right? Which again, if we think about what happens when people try to fight you, I don't know if you guys have ever gotten fights before, but if somebody starts threatening you, right, you kind of also have this biological response. Not to say that this is all biology, but I think it's another powerful, deeply ingrained response. Fight or flight. You guys ever had a fight or flight moment where you're just like, your heart starts pumping, you start to get kind of jacked up, right? And you're either ready to rumble with somebody or you're ready to run away from somebody, right? And, you know, depending on the night, might go either way. Usually run away is probably better. Just, or, you know, or give them the $20 that they're asking for and then run away. So in this case, the Buddha did neither of those things. He did not offer Mara $20, nor did he run away. He just sat there and magically things turned into flowers. What do you think would happen if they did not turn into flowers? Would the Buddha be afraid? He'd probably be dead, right? Was he afraid of death? It seems not. And that's really, again, the message, right? You know, they magically turn into flowers. It's almost like the gods are intervening again. But here we could think what it's showing is he's not afraid of death, right? Which is a pretty powerful thing to see, right? As much as we might, you know, have some vague sense of death and how we're not afraid to it, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if I'm ever really face to face with a death, life-threatening moment, I'm going to be afraid. I'm going to be really afraid, right? And I'm not going to be sitting with great posture like Keanu was right there. Yeah, okay, very good. So he's overcome sort of this cluster of lust and desire. He's overcome this cluster of fear and anger. What's the third one? Stephen asked me about that at the beginning of the break. Could anybody make sense of the third one? Did any of the breakout rooms talk about the third scene? Third scene. So again, Keanu kind of reaches into the puddle and pulls out his mirror image. They start talking about architecture and houses and living at each other's houses. Yeah.
I think that the man could have been him before he was Enlightenment, and Mara was kind of like saying that I used to be in you, like I used to be the desire that was in you, and now he's saying that like that doesn't exist anymore, so that's not that part of me that doesn't exist anymore.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, and I think the way they talked was much more garbled than that. The way you explained it was much more clear and understandable than the way they described it, right? It's basically Mara made this house, right? He made this world of illusion that frankly, you know, at least according to the Buddhists, we all still are in, right? There is this sense that we all live in some sort of giant illusory world, and it's not a big leap to then go to the Matrix. Have you guys seen the Matrix? Also Keanu Reeves, right? Same actor. So it's not a huge leap to get to this illusory world of the Matrix, but he uses the word architect. He says, you are the one who's creating this illusory world. I don't live in your house anymore, right? I don't live in your illusion anymore. And then Mara says, oh, yes, but you do. And then Keanu says, no, I don't. And then Mara says, prove it. And how does he prove it? How does he prove it? So if we jump back to the book, there is this sort of showdown with Mara, right? All of these scary weapons are flying around, all that sort of stuff. Blah, blah, blah. If you had made this progress toward enlightenment, you would have a witness. But you have no witness now, and so although you make these claims, you have no proof, right? He's making a claim. He's saying, I see through your illusions. I've overcome hatred and anger and fear and pride and jealousy and all of these negative emotions. I've overcome everything. Mara, you jerk, right? And then Mara is saying, prove it. Nobody is around here who can vouch for you necessarily. Prove it, Keanu Reeves. How does he prove it? Yes. He calls on the earth. Sophie got it too, yeah. He calls on the earth as his witness. And if you look at these images that I've been showing you, he is touching the earth, right? And you might notice he has an extremely long right arm here. Our left, his right. he is touching the earth. He's calling on the earth as his witness. You might have noticed the cover of our book. He is touching the earth, right? So this is that famous moment, right? If you ever go to a museum with your friends, you can amaze them when you see a Buddha image, and you almost certainly will if there are Buddha images. There is a good chance they'll be doing this pose. Actually, the first image at the top of the lecture today too. He's touching the earth. It's a very common pose. He's calling on the earth as his witness. Why is the earth a good witness? It's just kind of there, right? The earth theoretically is here now. I know it's, under the floorboards or whatever. I guess we're on the 4th floor, but there's a sense that the earth has been there, as long as the earth has existed, right? There's a continuity here. It reminds me of the good old days when I used to play Frisbee. Have I talked to you guys about Frisbee yet? Yeah, so I play Ultimate Frisbee, and I guess this would be probably back when I was in college or something. I used to practice all the time. I was on the team, and we'd practice like 3 or 4 days a week. We'd go to tournaments. It was like a big part of my life was playing Frisbee like all the time. And I remember there was this moment where one of the younger guys on the team was nervous because it was like the end of the game, and the game was on the line, whatever. And we were picking up the Frisbee. We called the timeout, and I said something to the effect of, how many times have you thrown this disc before, right? And of course, if you're practicing 4 or 5 times a week, or I guess 3 or 4 times a week, and doing tournaments and all that sort of stuff, he will have thrown that disc just with me thousands of times, right? And again, that's the point of practice, is you do it over and over and over and over and over and over to the point where it's just second nature, right? It's just something you don't even have to think about. It's a very easy thing. So when you finally get into this moment where Mara is in your face and saying, hey, are you really who you say you are? You sure you're not some imposter? Yeah, maybe you're not so enlightened after all. You're not a very enlightened guy. He can just say, look, buddy, I've lived so many lives and I've done so many things. I've saved so many people. I've sacrificed so many times. This is the life. This is the moment. This is now, right? And he is calling on earth as witness to all of those lives, right? To all of those moments across many, many lifetimes, all culminating in this moment of enlightenment. So again, if we rewind back here, we are at this final lifetime of awakening. But again, it's tying together this vow that he made and all of these thousands of lifetimes of effort that he put into it. Okay, and so the earth is his witness. You earth, you're my witness. And that's kind of it. He achieves enlightenment, right? So if we think about, one piece of the discussion question we haven't finished yet, and we can do this and then we'll take a break because I think we're all starting to lose it. What does he gain? Nirvana, yeah. So we could think about nirvana as losing something, and it is, right? He's lost his desire, he's lost his suffering. I think that's something Kevin brought up a moment ago, or at the beginning of the conversation. He's lost the causes of suffering, he's lost suffering itself. What does he get? What's the upshot, Stephen?
I was gonna say like knowledge, like he learns that like the truth and all that stuff, and he becomes like I think it's omniscience.
Close. Omniscience.
Something like that. It was like pretty much like all knowing.
Yes. All knowing. Omniscient. He knows everything. Yeah, exactly. So it's not just a lack of suffering, right? That's one part of it, and that's a pretty good part, right? But he also gains a bunch of stuff too. And in fact, we're not going to split all these hairs, but there are different levels of enlightenment. There are these beings called arhats that you might encounter, and they are almost there, right? They've overcome these negative emotions. They're not really suffering anymore, but they haven't quite gained the omniscience of a Buddha. And the way he really flexes on it is with multiple lives. So people in a lot of these Buddhist scriptures will come up to him, he'll tell a story, and he'll say, that, ladies and gentlemen, that fish that was really nice fish in a previous life was you, Ciara, right? And so he'll kind of turn the tables upside down and give some really interesting multi-life perspective with his omniscient knowledge, let's say. It also implies, another way of putting it is he knows the 3 times. I don't think we saw that in the reading, but maybe I will just see if you can make sense of it. What do you think the 3 times are? Past lives are one of them. That's one of the three. Yes, past, present, future. Yeah, so he knows everything that's happening now, kind of a Santa Claus kind of vibe. But he also knows everything that has happened in the past. That's all the past lives. And he also knows what will happen in the future, right? And so if we think about multiple lives, karma, how to be good boys and girls and get good effects from our karma and that sort of thing, he is the master of this, right? And he can give people advice about how to act. He can teach them in a way which is precisely tuned to what they need to hear, right? I cannot do that. When I teach, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. You have to ask me questions, that sort of thing. The Buddha is so skillful in his well, first of all, because of his knowledge, he's so skillful in his teachings. He can also teach the precisely right thing at the right time. Other things to think about is bliss is another word, right? He's lost pain, but he's gained bliss. So it's not even just a lack of sensation. It's not like he's become numb or something, right? I think that's a potential misunderstanding is to think that this is just, he's just got shut up with spiritual Novocaine or something. It's the opposite of that. He has intense feeling of bliss that's overcoming the entire moment, right? The gods are celebrating. The gods have achieved some sort of realization along with him, right? It's almost like a team effort, just as we achieved enlightenment. So you have become a Buddha, just like butter and buttercream. I've never made butter before, so that is a little bit lost on me, but he's maybe the butter and they're the cream, right? It's like it's all good and it's all coming from the same moment of creation. So yeah, he's achieved this coolness, this peace, release from suffering. He has bliss. I think bliss is maybe the word I want you to focus on here, right? You might not always associate Buddhism with bliss. You might think about, again, shaved head, robes, no sex. Sounds kind of horrible, in fact. But here, they're talking about something that is, it feels so good, right? It's not even something that we can necessarily even comprehend. And then finally, he goes on to teach, and we can start with that next time, right? Or sorry, after the break. So he finally goes on to teach, and we will start with his first teaching. But now I think it's 8:15, so let's take a break. 8:30, right? 15 minutes? Okay, let's do it. Let's take a 15-minute break. Resume at 8:30. I'm going to pause some of the breakout groups. Did you guys have anything that we didn't get to go over? I know we just sort of cut off a minute ago, and of course everybody in the room doesn't need to answer this, but folks in chat land, how are y'all doing? How were the breakout groups? Come up with good stuff? You guys all asleep? You back? Can't really know. I guess you know what I could do is I could look at your blank screens. Okay, yeah, you're all blank. That's fine. All right, well, whatever. Hopefully you're not asleep. Give me a thumbs up emoji. Oh, we got a good stuff. All right, that's good. Let's see. Can I make an emoji? Thumbs up emoji. Copy and paste that if you want. Yeah, there we go. Raffaelle's still alive. Very good. All right, so at least some people are alive. That's what I like to see. And, you know, just to finish that last discussion, we've got some enlightenment. Thumbs up for enlightenment. Joseph, thumbs up. Guy, thumbs up. Very good. All right. So the Buddha achieves enlightenment. The gods are excited. Everybody's all blissed out and having a great time. They're comparing it to butter and buttercream, whatever that means. No, that means something. In the world that makes butter, that means something. I don't make butter, so I don't really know what it means. But Mara also says, okay, Buddha, you've achieved enlightenment. Why don't you pass to final nirvana, which is a term we'll talk about in a moment. But it just is to say there are sort of different steps to this process, right? Here, as you can see, Keanu Reeves is a young man. He's 35 years old. Siddhartha is 35 years old when he achieves enlightenment. It's not until he's 80 years old that he actually passes away, right? And so that is kind of a euphemism for passing away, final nirvana. And in fact, the Tibetan phrase for that phrase, to reach final nirvana, is often used when people die. It's a very respectful way to talk about death. I feel like in some ways English can be an impoverished language. It's a little hard to be respectful sometimes. I don't know if you guys are ever looking for creative ways to be respectful, but in many languages, there are very respectful ways of speaking to talk to your beloved teacher, for example. You'd be using a different register, a more honorific register than the way you talk to each other, right? Or to you, someone who's lower than you, right? There's sort of a hierarchy baked into it, for better or for worse. And so when people talk about the Buddha, they often use like the highest, most respectful language. So anyways, Mara says, hey, basically, why don't you just die? Buddha, you've achieved enlightenment, why don't you get the hell out of here? And the Buddha says, nope. He wants to kind of spread the good word. He wants to teach, right? And so that's what he decides to do. He doesn't do it immediately, though, because initially he thinks maybe no one will understand my teachings, right? And so that's a problem. Do you guys ever have this problem where you feel like, I figured something really important out, but no one will understand me? I guess I'll just keep it in my heart. Or maybe I'll write a blog post about it or something, right? No, people probably don't write blog posts anymore. But he has this realization. He's attained an essential dharma. I'm looking at page 67. Simple, peaceful, deep, bright, elemental. No one I might teach will understand, so I shall live in silence in the woods, right? It's sort of this classic like sage living up on the mountain. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Where it's like they have all this wisdom, but they're staying away from society. They're not trying to become Instagram famous or anything. They're just kind of living on their own. But then the gods show up. Brahma says, hey, buddy, on the next page, here in Magda, which is an area of India, low teachings reign, corrupt and unholy, poor thinking. Open the gate to your essential teaching. Please explain your flawless understanding. So again, the gods appear and they're like, come on, you figured this thing out. You got to share it with all the other humans. And the Buddha's like, all right, fine. And so he takes on those 5 ascetics, those guys who were sort of jerks to him, right? Like we saw in the movie. They end up kind of, they see him coming and they're like, oh, here's that jerk Siddhartha who's too weak to hang out with us. And then they're like, wait a minute, is he like floating off the ground and glowing golden and all that sort of thing? And oh, okay, maybe we should pay attention to him. Maybe he figured something out. And so in any case, they become his first disciples. And so that's his first teaching is what we will go over next, the 4 Noble Truths. He also talks about the middle way, which is kind of part of the 4 Noble Truths. But yeah, so we're going to get a little philosophical now, right? We've done a lot of narratives. We talked about karma tales and the life story of the Buddha. We've basically done almost entirely narratives up until this point. That's not true, actually. The one of the first readings we did was Kyon. But here, it's really not narrative anymore. It's really more philosophical. And so that's something we discussed at the beginning. Maybe you remember blind men and the elephant, right? They were holding on to different pieces of Buddhism. Here is a piece of Buddhism that people like to hold on to. They say Buddhism is a philosophy and it's a way of life. And if you had to boil it down to just one philosophical teaching or one way of life, it is this teaching. It's the 4 Noble Truths. So this is a really central teaching. And as you can see, it's asking the big questions, right? How do we suffer? Why do we suffer? What is it like to be a Buddha, right? What is it like to achieve enlightenment? And how do we end suffering, right? And again, all of us who are suffering through this COVID hell are asking that same question. We might think we need to, again, get vaccinated or flatten the curve or whatever. But the Buddha has a different plan here. He's got the 4 Noble Truths. So as you can see, there are 4 of them. That shouldn't be a surprise. The truth of suffering, arising, cessation, and the path. And we will go through these one by one. I guess maybe before we get started, this is sort of a weird question. Is this even worth exploring? Maybe I'll try to phrase it a little bit better. If you think about your life, I was just saying how, COVID, we're all suffering right now. We're all super stressed out. But do you ever think about what exactly makes you suffer in this life? Is that something that crosses your mind? Or you just sort of go through with it and try not to think about it? one reason I asked this, I was listening to a podcast. I listen to lots of podcasts. You guys listen to podcasts? Kind of, sort of, maybe. This American Life, anyone? I'll put it in the chat. This American Life, anyone? Ira Glass? WB Easy Chicago? So anyways, if you don't know it, it's sort of a classic podcast. I highly recommend it, honestly. It's sort of a light intellectual explorations. It's very entertaining, but I almost always learn something. Smart people telling really good stories, right? So a lot of the things, like, I hate to say it, but even this life story of the Buddha, I would say it's a great story. This isn't like easy to read, you know what I mean? But This American Life is very easy to listen to. The way they present it, it just sort of rolls off the tongue. It's really, really nice. So in any case, This American Life had a story about one of their producers, actually two of the producers talking to each other, and one is a sort of an anxious person, and it's like, whenever I go to the grocery store, I'm sort of worrying about things. I pick up my basket and I wonder, oh, was that person about to pick up that basket, or was this basket for me? And they're sort of wondering what everybody else is thinking about and getting all nervous about it. And the other producer was strikingly the opposite, right? Very much not thinking about anything and just like seeing the basket, picking up the basket, and sort of living her life, looking out the window. And she wasn't like bragging about it or anything. I think when you get into a Buddhist context, that's sort of something that somebody might brag about, but she wasn't even Buddhist. She was just sort of like, this is just how my brain works. You know, it's sort of a delightful exchange. So if that tickles your fancy, it's the most recent episode of This American Life. It just came out, I don't know, a couple days ago. I listened to it today, I think. Did I listen to it today? Yeah, part of it today, part of it yesterday. So anyways, coming back to here, this question of why do we suffer? That person who's just sort of living her life, she's not necessarily thinking about, you know, am I suffering right now? Why am I suffering right now? What might cause me to suffer? And, you know, I think that's sort of part of her charm, right? Whereas I think many people, I'm not going to say most or even all people or anything like that, but many people do think about these things, right? Like, what's going on? How's that person doing? How am I doing? Am I doing okay? Yeah, I'm probably doing okay, but I could be doing worse. I could be doing better. And so I guess, what do you guys come up with? Why do we suffer? How do we suffer? What is the role of suffering in your life? Is this something you ever think about? I know it's sort of a personal question, so obviously you don't have to answer if you don't want. But what is a source of suffering for you, if you would like to share? Kevin? Breakup. Ooh, that was the worst. I've been through that, my friend. Yeah. Yeah. And so this one, dare I say, might even be able to help you, Kevin. So no, maybe not, maybe so. You know, if you think about a relationship, if you think about the role of relationships in Buddhism, you can see that, you know, the ideal practitioner is a monk, right? So they don't have problems with breakups. Is someone just talking? Lauren, you talking? Or was that a mistake?
No, I didn't talk.
Okay. So yeah, exactly. As we dig into this system of the Four Noble Truths, we can begin to think about, and we, again, thank you for sharing, Kevin, but this gives us something to sort of chew on. Think about, how does a breakup feed itself through these Four Noble Truths, and what comes out the other side? Anybody else have other things that they want free therapy session with? I guess it's not free. This is college. You do have to pay for it. So very expensive therapy session. Anybody? No? Okay. Oh, you guys, the chat is blowing up. Look at this. All right, we've got homework. You can suffer physically from being sore at the gym. Sometimes worrying about something is worse than actually doing it. Generally, after suffering, there's some sort of growth, mental or physical. You guys are the best. This is great. Yeah. So Matt is absolutely right. Homework, just and if we expand that out, just having stuff to do is terrible, right? You wake up in the morning and you have your to-do list either written out or in your mind or whatever. And again, it feels crushing, even though to tie in, who said it? Sophie said sometimes worrying about something is worse than actually doing it, right? I'm sure you've heard the sort of meme version of this where like you worry about something for a week and then you go and do it and it takes like 10 minutes, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? Certainly true for me, right? And very basic stuff, you know, feeding myself, cleaning up after myself, all these chores, all these tasks. I'm not so disciplined in these things, I hate to admit. And, you know, what could be a very simple task ends up, you know, getting sort of a mental weight attached to it, which it doesn't really necessarily need to have. Raffaelli's bringing up physical issues, right? So you could hurt yourself. You could just be sore at the gym. That can be sort of nice, but you could injure your, you know, like I said, playing Frisbee, people get injured all the time. That's sort of horrible. Worrying about something. Yeah, we just talked about that. After something, there's some sort of growth. So Kyle is pointing out that by going through these hardships, we can often learn from them. And again, that's what we're trying to do with these Four Noble Truths. So I like that idea too. I think the Buddha would like that idea too. There's some sort of growth, mental or physical, mental for sure, suffering, doing homework, grow your knowledge, get a good grade, suffering in the gym on the treadmill, get rewarded with getting in good shape. Yeah, Kyle's spelling it all out. That's like a whole week's worth of ups and downs right there. Yeah. Okay, good. So that actually was more, you guys were able to engage with that more than I was initially anticipating. So that's great. Now, when the Buddha was initially kind of living and working in the world, there was an explanation for suffering that was common, which we did not really read about, but there was sort of a path, let's say. His friends, the ascetic meditators, right? Basically, this whole story is a bit of a jab at them. And I told you that they were doing these meditations that kind of pulled them away from reality, right? And took them into their special little world. And there's a very specific philosophy behind that. And we're not going to go into the details of it, but just very simply put, they had the sense that they had this soul, which is often called the self with a capital S. But yeah, we could just call it a soul as well. Maybe soul is better, right? Because you've got your body. You guys all are aware that you have bodies, right? And then you've also got this soul. That's the way his ascetic buddies were thinking. And they were saying that the problem is your body. Your body is weak. Your body will die one day. And so the goal here is to kind of master your body with your soul, right? And to identify your soul, not with your body, because again, your body is what gets hurt. Your body is what dies, but with something more permanent, this kind of ultimate soul, this ultimate reality called Brahman. And again, this is more of a Hindu teaching, and so we don't have to go into the details of it, but that's what they were doing, right? They were basically doing this meditation where they're imagining, I am one with the universe. I am one with the trees and the waters and everything else, right? And they were sort of leaving their body and expanding their sense of self and becoming one with the universe, effectively. This is still sort of a part of Buddhism, but again, this is what the Buddha is also criticizing here early on. So earlier explanations for why we suffer is we focus on our body too much, right? You're too attached to your body. And again, I think there's a little flavor of that still here in America. If you're like a hypochondriac, you guys know what a hypochondriac is? What's a hypochondriac?
Yeah, like when you think you have a certain disease, but you might not. Like you just always think that you have something when they tell you about it.
Yes, exactly. And I think to a certain degree, we are all hypochondriacs right now. That hypochondriac part of us is certainly ratcheted up, or at least that's the case for me. And so there's a sense that if you're too attached to your body, if you're too attached to your health, you're too worried about how you're doing all the time, this is going to cause problems for you. So what should you do? It's kind of grit your teeth and get through it and not worry about it so much, right? And so in the language of this Hindu philosophical system is to basically think about your soul, right? Think about your immortal soul. Think about, put a smile on your face and identify with Brahman, something like that. Now, the Buddha comes back at that and says, no, that's wrong. There is no soul. So the Buddha was a very early hater of souls. No, he didn't necessarily hate them, but he just says it's logically a problem, right? The Buddha loved to break things down into pieces and think about how things come together in order to create other things. And so in the case of ourselves, he's saying there is no ultimate self. That's a bunch of horse shit, right? He's saying that is false. That's just a story that these guys are telling each other that's false. If you look for this ultimate self, you're not going to find it, right? And we all know from modern science, if you chop somebody's heart open or something, you're not going to find like a little tiny person inside of there, some ultimate self, are you? some ultimate personality or a little person who's like behind their eyeballs and like driving the ship or something like that. Homunculus, have you ever heard of a homunculus before? This ultimate self is an illusion, right? And again, this idea of an illusion is a big part of Buddhism. The Buddha says, no, there is no self. This whole thing, like you have a self, you have a soul that you need to identify with the big self and the big soul. All that is just, it's a waste of time. What are you really made out of is you're made out of these 5 things. You have a body, a form, right? I think that's undeniable. And in fact, in our modern world, we've made a similar move. And I think that's one reason the Buddha kind of got some clout around 100 years ago, is he threw out the soul 2,500 years ago, and we kind of caught up and said, all right, yeah, you're right, the soul is a bunch of bullshit. Let's get rid of the soul. No, I don't mean to denigrate the soul in our Catholic school, but that's what the Buddhists were doing 2,500 years ago, is saying that souls are made up. So what are we made of? Well, we have these bodies, right? We have a form, we have sensations. And so this is really what we usually say is we have a body and a mind, right? I think if I polled you guys, that's what we come up with. You guys have bodies and minds? You got anything else? Probably, maybe. What else are we besides body and mind? Anything else? What is your self made of? Body, mind, what else? So what, as you're thinking about this, what the Buddhists do is they actually take the mind and break it into 4 pieces. So again, if you think about, okay, you've got a body, that's pretty clear. The body can be broken into many different parts, right? You got your limbs, you got your organs, you got all sorts of stuff. Get deeper in there, you got your cells and whatever, right? Go to biology class to learn those things. But the mind, we often don't break that down into pieces, or at least not very consciously. Freud did. You guys know the parts of the mind according to Freud? Sigmund Freud, very popular 100 years ago. The reason I bring him up is I think even though we don't talk about him very much, his ideas still sort of live on in a lot of the stories we tell. The id, ego, super ego, your conscious mind, your unconscious mind. You guys ever think about this sort of thing? Your little, your inner child, this idea of an inner child. Now, again, the Buddha would say that's horseshit. There is no inner child, right? But I don't want to downplay Freud too much, because again, he's pretty popular. But here's what the Buddha comes up with. He says, feeling. So again, our sensation, right? So I can feel this desk. It feels smooth and sort of cold. There are other sense perceptions as well, right? You can see things, you can hear things, you can smell things, you can taste things. Buddhists pay a lot of attention to this, how we sense the world. And again, it plays a major part of the philosophy here. And so what form, feeling, I think I should put, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I should put a comment here. And then beyond, when you feel something, is adding kind of labels to it. So your perception, so you can see the color. These colors are sort of hard to describe. So you can see the color blue on my phone, right? And then it's like, oh, I like the color blue, right? Or at the very least, just say the color blue, or sort of a light blue. And so you can add some sort of conceptual information to that. Then there are these mental formations. This is a really ambiguous category. Things like your personality, the things you like, the things you don't like, your dispositions, the things you tend to do or you tend not to do. All of that falls into here. And then finally, the last one is your consciousness. What is consciousness? Have you ever thought about this before? What's consciousness? Id, ego, super ego. Yeah, good. I'm glad you guys got that one. Yeah, spirit or soul. And so that extra thing is exactly what the Buddhists are throwing out, this idea of a spirit or soul. So what is consciousness then? Is that a hint, Steven?
Yeah, it's like kind of like knowing that you're alive and kind of thinking like about life. It's like sort of like thinking about life itself.
Yeah. It's a little late to be getting too deep into this stuff. Yes, but you put it very nicely, I thought. Thinking about thought itself. You can turn consciousness on itself. It's sort of a weird concept. And that's kind of what that This American Life episode was about, right? Again, if you think about consciousness, I've heard it compared to like a crystal, right? Or something, or even this like weird glass thing that separates me from you, let me out. It's sort of like something like this, and then you can kind of turn it on itself, or even like a mirror or something like that, right? Where your ability to think, right, that whatever that space is where all this other stuff happens, that is your consciousness. It's the background for all of your other mental functions. And you can, like Stephen is saying, you can turn it on itself, and it becomes self-reflexive. So it's a very special philosophical word, self-reflexive awareness. And so in any case, we don't have to go too deep into this, but this is what the Buddhists start thinking about. This is what the Buddha was doing when he's out in the woods. And he's like, what am I really made out of, right? Everything is made out of these different parts. Again, we have this body. He doesn't really care about the body, though. What he cares about is how does the mind work? What are the different pieces of the mind? And again, you don't have to believe this, but he goes on to say there is no soul. That you, that very specific you, that Kevin, that Aiden, that Kyla, right? That very specific you that's at your core, that little child that gets hurt in all the movies or whatever, right? He's saying that is an illusion. That thing that you're holding on to is not really there. And so that's step number one. Now you might be wondering, what does this have to do with suffering? Well, he goes on to say, because we have these 5 factors, because we are made up of these parts, we tend to suffer. These 5 factors are what we get when we are born. They fall apart, our bodies fall apart, our minds fall apart. Your mind falling apart might not be so easy to understand, but again, with stress, with time, with Alzheimer's disease, these things begin to fail us too, right? We get old, we suffer, we die, we suffer, pain, grief, sorrow, lamentation. And again, this is a quote directly from the Buddha, translated in Kyon. Association with what is unpleasant is suffering, dissociation from what is, so association with unpleasant, dissociation from pleasant, all of this is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In short, the 5 factors of individuality are suffering. So these 5 factors, actually, I should have given you a note about this. So Kyon calls them the 5 factors of individuality, which is a mouthful. And so that's why I use the more common translation of the aggregate. So, but the list 5 factors is also fine. These are the 5 things that make us up, right? And because we are made of these things, we are prone to suffer. That's what's being argued here. And just like we talked about in the chat, there are different kinds of suffering, right? Either the obvious ones where you're hurt, like just pain, like very obvious pain. There's the more abstract ones, like when you miss somebody, right? And you want to be with somebody and you can't be with that person. So you are dissociated from what is pleasant, right? You are longing to be with somebody, you miss somebody. It's a little more abstract, right? From the outside, you might not be able to see it, but just like this discussion is saying, it is nonetheless a very real form of suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering, right? All these things, to have all these things, these factors that make us up will cause us to suffer. Now, what is the cause? Why do we suffer? The Buddhists always bring it back to these negative emotions. The Buddha was experimenting with it. He said maybe all of desire is bad, right? We already talked about that. He decides to sort of go back on that. He says, okay, that's a little bit too extreme. Let's walk that back. Let's figure out which desires are bad, right? And of course, that takes some time. And so again, here's another quote from the Buddha. He uses this language of thirst or craving. It's a very specific word, tanha, which sometimes is translated as desire. But I encourage you, I mean, I'm not going to say that it's wrong on an exam or anything, but I encourage you to think a little more deeply about this, right? What kind of desire? Because again, we've already said that not all desires are bad, right? It's very specific kinds of desire that cause you trouble. And the Buddhists do come up with lists of these things, and they're happy to tell you what they are. But I think the best technique to figure this out is to just try, right? To live your life and see what sort of desires lead to negative consequences. And then when you realize that, then you can think, maybe I shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. So the Buddha breaks it down to this: thirst for sensual pleasure, thirst for existence, thirst for non-existence. So that last one is a little confusing, but it's basically saying sometimes you want to destroy stuff, right? Sometimes you don't want things to exist, including yourself, right? Again, we talked about the Buddha sort of being on the brink of suicide back at this one. And all of this is being encapsulated in these different causes of suffering, right? This arising. Where does suffering come from? Sometimes you want things to exist in a certain way and you don't get it. Sometimes you want things to not exist, at least in the way that they exist. And so it is this thirst, right? This craving that causes suffering. And then it kind of spirals out into greed and hatred and ignorance, which again, we saw in the movie, right? In that scene, that was not an accident. This triad of greed, hatred, ignorance is often depicted as the core reasons why we suffer, the causes of suffering, the reasons that suffering arises. So this, again, was a major realization of the Buddha. He was experimenting with all these ideas. He's doing all this meditation. He was thinking about, why do I suffer? Maybe it's because desire is bad, and maybe all desire is bad. And so he tries to get rid of all desire. It doesn't really work. He walks it back, and he thinks, what specific kinds of desire are causing me problems? And maybe you remember the wheel have these three animals in the middle. These are symbols for those three negative emotions. So maybe I'll ask you guys, which one do you think the snake represents? Cross-cultural animal symbols here. Stephen? Yes, why do you say that? Just a guess?
I don't know, cause like, no, it just doesn't seem like greed. Not really. It doesn't really seem like it would fit. Like other like uses of like snakes and stories and stuff.
Yeah.
So hatred just seems like
They just got the teeth and they strike, right? I mean, that's sort of like hatred. You know, you get your claws out, you get your jaws out, your teeth out, and then boom, you're hating on stuff. So yeah, exactly. The snake is hatred. The other two maybe are a little less clear. What do you think the pig is? You would think that, right? Eat like a pig. Pigs do eat a lot, very greedy. But no, the pig is ignorance. I don't really know why it's ignorance. I guess, actually, I have maybe an explanation. It's not a canonical one. I've never read this anywhere, but I think it's not differentiating between things that it eats. It just eats everything, right? Dogs do too, right? You know, dogs, they'll eat their food and then they'll eat some disgusting thing, right? And so in ancient Indian culture, dogs are sort of looked down as a result of this. And I think pigs are as well, just because pigs eat all the different stuff. Maybe you've heard pigs being called unclean, right? I think there's a sort of a similar sense of that across the world. So in any case, pigs don't discriminate clean things from unclean things. Maybe that is why they're ignorant. I don't know. And then finally, greed is the rooster. And maybe if we put lust in there, that makes a little more sense, because of course the rooster is responsible for inseminating all those eggs. Okay, so we've already talked about, is all desire bad? And I think we've come to the conclusion about that. We haven't talked about anger. Is all anger bad? There's such thing as good anger?
just like if you get like angry about like injustice and stuff like that would be sort of understandable. Like if something like that happened and you got angry,
Yeah.
like if someone got like murdered, like of course you're gonna be like mad, especially if you know the person.
Yeah.
I mean, like as long as it doesn't relate to like negative sort of things afterwards. What was the other thing that we talked about before? It was like that, like bad, like emotions and stuff like that would lead to like bad consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So like bad thoughts. So like if you're like, I want to kill this guy too.
Yeah.
Then, like that would probably not be good anger. But like if you're like, this guy deserves justice, then probably it would be better.
It's an interesting question. It's kind of a difficult one, right? Because then, like you're saying, where does the anger go, right? If I get angry at an injustice and my response is, let's break some shit, right? Or let's hurt some people or whatever. Let's find the person who did this and string them up. I think the Buddhists would not really be down with that, right? So I agree with you. I think anger about injustice is definitely on the right track here. But then the question becomes, then what do you do with that anger? And of course, as the stereotype goes, at least, they're probably going to be pretty chill about it. It's not going to mean they're going to do nothing, right? And in fact, as a teacher, this is something I'm learning, is that a little bit of anger goes a very long way in a classroom. Not too much anger, right? You don't want to be that crazy teacher who flips out all the time, right? But a little bit of firmness, just to enforce rules and make sure that, I'm being the cop that I'm supposed to be. I think that'll go a long way. Guy says as long as it doesn't harm anyone. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it, right? Can you be angry and not harm people? I mean, you could also think about a parent, right? I'm not a parent, so this is all hypothetical for me, but sometimes parents got to get angry. I'm sure you guys have had this experience that when you were kids, parents get mad at you. If you talk to them about it now, I don't know what sort of relationship you have, but they might not be quite as angry. There are things where, my dad was like, oh yeah, I was just totally just acting, pretending like I was angry to sort of enforce the point, right? And this seems like kind of an important parent move, right? Even when you're not necessarily super angry, you sort of, sometimes have to use this strength, right, for the sake of the child, right, in order to guide the child, to lead the child. But again, it can be a slippery slope, right? Because parents can also be the source of trauma, like we were talking about before, injuring the inner child. And anger is often the beginning of that. So it's not to say that all parental anger is justified. It's almost certainly not the case. So this question, is there good anger? I tend to agree with Stephen. I think the answer is yes, but it leads to a better question, is what is it? What does it look like? How do you do that well? And I have to say, I'm not really sure the answer to that either. Okay, other thoughts on this? Arising. So yeah, craving. I quoted Kyon here. It connotes desire that has become perverted in some sense. I think that's an interesting word, right? Perverse. And so that's one way you can think about these specific kinds of desire. They're either excessive or they're wrongly directed. Maybe obsession is another word we could add here. Its aim is usually sensory stimulation and pleasure, right? It's these pleasure of the senses. And so the Buddhists do tend to be pretty disciplined about this, right? You might be thinking, I'm talking about the middle way. The story talks about the middle way, but he still seems pretty damn disciplined when he's sitting under that tree, doesn't he? Right? He ate some food, but that's not some major indulgence. And indeed, they keep it up, right? A lot of these sensual pleasures that we all tend to enjoy, nice dinners, nice drinks, nice parties, whatever, all of these sorts of things the Buddhists tend to shy away from, right? So even though it is a middle way, they kind of flirt with that line more on the ascetic side than on the indulgent side. I thought this was a really nice line talking about wholesome desires, whereas wrong desires restrict and fetter, right desires enhance and liberate. And it made me think of this Maya Angelou video that I watched recently. Would you guys like to watch it with me? Let's see, how much time we got left? We got 30 minutes. Yeah, there's plenty of time. You guys want to watch the Maya Angelou video? It actually is in two parts. It's from this Oprah interview that she did. You guys know who Maya Angelou is? You don't think so? Well, prepare to be educated, my friend.
My grandmother, my father's mother, raised me. She was an amazing woman.
Right.
She told me.
Okay, so this is Maya Angelou. She passed away 6 or 7 years ago. Maya Angelou. Let's see, yeah, that's all good. Okay. And I guess I'll pause the record. How do you guys interpret that? Why is she emphasizing these two possible aspects of love? Yeah? Yeah. Does love always set people free though? Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like love, or what you were calling love at least, felt kind of binding? Have you ever felt bound? Or have you ever bound someone in a relationship? And it doesn't have to be romantic. It could be other kinds of relationship too, right? There's lots of sorts of love out there in the world. So how do you shift from one to the other? How do you shift from a binding sort of love to a liberating sort of love? She gave examples of what it looks like, but it's actually hard to put into practice, I would say. Do you guys agree with me? if I really love somebody, especially romantic partner, I want them to be with me, right? I don't want to say goodbye. I don't want to say go, fly away from me. I want to keep them here as long as I need them. Maybe I will need them, right? So this again, it's what to say? It's kind of a grand vision of love. I thought it gave some texture to this more philosophical talk, but it's one way we can think about the difference between a wholesome desire and a less wholesome desire, right? A craving, right? A craving is kind of all about me and what do I want, what do I need, right? Whereas this liberatory sort of love is a little, it keeps this other person in mind as a person, right? And again, sees the larger picture. Her mother was dying. It would be selfish, understandably so, but it would be a little bit selfish if Maya Angelou said, no, stay with me, mom, you can't die yet. But of course, Maya Angelou is basically, well, she was, a saint, to be honest. Because again, if you know the background of her story, her mother was very unkind to her. It was her own grandmother who gave her the liberatory love. It was her mother who abandoned her when she was a kid, right? So she didn't talk about her mom that way. She had one little line where she's like, she was a piss poor mother of young children, right? And that is a reference to this very traumatic incident that she had as a kid. Her parents abandoned her. So in any case, this is somebody she had every right to be mean to, right? To say, screw you, mom. You weren't there for me when I was a kid. You hurt my little inner child. But of course, again, she was a very saintly woman, Maya Angelou. So she had a way to love, a way to think about love that I find quite inspiring. Free from emotional attachment, learning to let go. Yeah, exactly. It's learning to let go. It's hard to learn to let go, though. And I think she, again, provides an inspiring example for how to do that. Get to expand the picture beyond oneself. And again, when we think about Buddhism and this idea of the self, it actually, there is a way to kind of dismantle this idea of the self, right? Rather than just saying, push it down real far, something like that, through these meditations and through thinking about the way that things really are, you can kind of play with this sense of self. Who am I? What am I made of? Why am I here? Why am I this way? What sort of karma led me to this moment? What sort of circumstances led to this situation that I have with this person? And so actually there's again a philosophical idea behind this called interdependent origination. Kyon talks about it very briefly, but here's what he says. He says, everything which comes into being originates in dependence on something else. Nothing exists independently in and for itself. Now that might feel, I don't know, sort of obvious maybe? I don't know, is that obvious? Is that how you guys live your life? Do you think about the different causes and factors that sort of cascade and pile up on each other, leading to the various circumstances of your life? Not as much. It's something to strive toward, I guess. And so regardless of whether we intellectually accept this or not, the way we experience life is very rarely like this, right? The way we experience life is we often just think this thing happens and we think, why did this happen? It happened to me, right? Why does my exam have to be that day? Why does this thing happen to me? Why does this person have to treat me this way? Why do I have so much homework, right? Whereas if you get a little bit of perspective, you can sort of zoom out. And again, you probably don't look at me this way, but teachers are people too, right? And we have our circumstances and situations, and you might wonder why a teacher is acting so mean that day or whatever. And they might have this thing going on in their life that you don't even know about, right? Maybe there's pressure on them from the dean or from their department chair, or they have some other thing in the background of their life, right? And so as we learn these larger circumstances, we can actually learn a lot about why people act the way that they do, right? And it's not just people, it's really everything. You could take the same principle and apply it to chemistry, to biology. And this is something early Buddhists really wanted to do. Like 100 years ago, the Buddhists were like, we're very scientific. Here is this very scientific philosophy of life. It's talking about cause and effect, causes and conditions. That's what science is all about. And honestly, there's some truth to that, right? Again, it's one part of the elephant, but it is part of the elephant. This is something that the Buddhists were talking about very early on. If we zoom into this picture, these are called the 12 links of interdependent origination, and each one is a different picture. Each one represents something slightly different. This is a blind person who's being led by a young person. This is a symbol of ignorance. And basically this chain, this cascading chain of cause and effect often begins with ignorance. That's what this is trying to say. Just like a blind person encountering the world, there are almost always factors we don't see. There are almost always things happening that we don't understand. And so again, the Buddhists would encourage you to try to see those things, to try to understand those things, but we often act in the world with at least some degree of ignorance until you're Buddha, right? Because the Buddha knows everything. But until you're Buddha, you don't really know what's going on. And then you can kind of go through, this guy's making a pot, and so it symbolizes this function of creation. Here's a monkey in a tree. This guy's on a boat. There's some of them are pretty weird. There's one guy with an arrow sticking out of him. I think that's that one. I can't really tell. Yeah, he's got an arrow in his eye. And so it goes around, and there's this sense that we don't have to go through all the links of dependent origination, but there's this sense that things, again, 1 starts to 2, starts to 3, starts to 4, and they just sort of snowball and spiral out of control. And the way we can kind of push back against this cascading effect is just by understanding it, right? Is by seeing these systems as they unfold. As a result of this situation, everything being a conglomeration of all these other different causes and effects means that they're impermanent. Maybe that's a good place to start. Impermanent. What does it mean if something is impermanent? What does it mean if something is permanent? It's forever. Permanent marker. Permanent tattoo. But is a permanent marker really permanent? It might last for a long time. If I get a tattoo that says tattoos are impermanent, would that be clever? How are tattoos impermanent? Because we are impermanent, right? It might last your whole life, but you're not going to be here forever, right? It will go away. Even these things that we feel like are so permanent are impermanent. Even the earth, right? We talked about the earth as this like stable, lasting element in our lives, right? Is the earth permanent? It is not, right? Now we're starting to get into physics and astronomy or whatever. But even the earth will have to come to an end, right? This is something, again, the Buddhists have been talking about for a long time. And I think of all the philosophical things we're talking today, this is a very important one. It encapsulates a lot. And it's frankly, it's true, right? Very few things will I really push on you and say this is a fact, but it is a fact, right? That basically everything is impermanent. I mean, I'd be happy to hear if you can come up with something that is permanent. There are a few things, but the way the Buddhists put it is compounded phenomena, right? Phenomena that come from these different causes and conditions that are part of this cascading effect of cause and effect. These are all impermanent. And why is that? Is because the conditions that led to them are impermanent, right? The whole thing is just a big stack of impermanent pieces that are constantly shifting around. So nothing will ever stay. What does that have to do with suffering? Why does impermanence cause us suffering? Yeah. We don't live our lives this way. I don't. And, I'm teaching you guys this stuff right now. So I imagine you probably don't either. I don't wake up in the morning and think about how impermanent I am, right? I don't, treat my precious computer that I put thousands of hours of work into and have like so many files, like my hard drive is full. I should be more careful with this now that I mentioned it, right? Because this thing's gonna break one day and probably soon. And so actually, no, it served me very well. I got this in it was when this type of MacBook Pro was new. So it was like 2015, 16 maybe. It's been a good 5 years though. And to have a computer for 5 years is pretty good. But it is time, I think, to maybe start getting a new one. So in any case, impermanence, right? Do I approach this thing thinking this is gonna be the day where my computer dies, my precious computer? Hell no, right? I assume that it'll work tomorrow and the next day and the next day, even though in the back of my mind, like, yeah, the day will probably come when it's gonna break. The day it breaks, I'm still going to be super surprised, even if it's my fault and I drop it or something like that. So yeah, what does suffering have to do with impermanence? We don't approach the world as if it is impermanent, and yet it is impermanent. That very basic fact leads to a lot of problems. And again, to come back to love and romance, I hate to say it, but are you ever going to be BFFs? Are you ever going to be best friends forever? Are you ever going to be soulmates forever? I mean, maybe in the next life, but not, all you got is this life. You will have to say goodbye one day. It'll be either you on your deathbed or them on their deathbed, but you will have to say goodbye, right? And so this idea of things lasting forever, we tell ourselves that it will, we tell ourselves that it'll be okay, but again, those mean Buddhists remind us that that is not the case. And again, we come back to this lack of a self. Now, people misinterpret this as saying that you don't exist. And that's kind of what the movie did. Keanu Reeves even said that Mara doesn't exist or whatever. I'm here to first tell you that you do exist. So don't misunderstand me, please. You do exist. I had a teacher talk about this one time. It's like, if you're ever talking about this idea of no self and beginning to think that maybe you don't exist, just, walk over to traffic and, see what happens, because you'll be quickly reminded that you do exist. You do exist, right? You do exist. The question is just, how do you exist, right? Are you some fundamental self? Is there like a bill in here that's like my super special bill that holds all of my personal data or something like that? Some hard processor. A lot of people might say the self is the brain, but of course there's a lot going on other than your brain, right? You are not your brain. If you put your brain in a tub of water or whatever, that's not going to be you somehow, right? Contrary to what like cartoons might tell you from when you were a child. So in any case, absence of a self. The self is just yet another one of these phenomena. It's composed of pieces and parts. You're made by your parents. You're made by your surroundings. There's some biology in there, no doubt, but that is just another factor, right? Your body is another one of these factors. Your various parts of your mind, another one of these factors. Your experiences, another one of these factors, right? So what are we? We want the impermanent to last forever. Yeah, exactly. And so actually Gaia's comment from earlier, learning to let go, is precisely on brand with this, right? Relationships are impermanent. I hate to say it. If you approach it from the beginning that way, it can be painful, but at the same time, it is very realistic, right? Is learning to let go, is reflecting on the impermanence of this and really everything. Okay, so questions about that? I know that's a lot of information, but this is, again, core Buddhist ideas. If we want to think what is Buddhist philosophy, this is it. It's thinking about how things come together and how we interact with them and how they make us suffer as a result. Questions so far? Are we doing good? You got 10 minutes left. Can you do it? We can do it. And we don't have to do the whole 10 minutes, but we could. 7 minutes, let's say. 7 minutes will be enough. So cessation, are you familiar with this word? To cease? Cease and desist? What does it mean to cease? Stop. Cessation is stopping, right? So what is stopping then? What are we talking about again? Stopping bad desires, which leads to what effect? Suffering, yeah. Suffering. So that's the big thing we're talking about here. We got suffering. How does it exist? Where does it come from? How does it arise? Now we're talking about how does it stop? Actually, it's not even how, it's just can it stop, right? Again, Justin Bieber has the line, he doesn't believe in nirvana. He's basically saying he doesn't think suffering can stop. I know that's not what he meant when he sang that. He probably just meant that he's not Buddhist, but that's basically what he's saying, right? To believe in nirvana is to believe that there is an end to suffering, which is kind of a nice message, right? It's been a bit of a heavy day today, hasn't it? I guess every day is a heavy day in Buddhism class. But yeah, nirvana is the cessation of suffering. And again, if we think about it through this cause and effect process, how do you end suffering? Is you think about what causes you suffering. You pay careful attention to your life, right? And you watch, this thing causes me suffering. I had Chinese food for dinner tonight and my tummy feels a little weird, right? So Chinese food probably makes my tummy feel a little bit weird. Maybe I should eat some vegetables and not just deep fried chicken for dinner, right? So I gave a stupid example, but of course the Buddhists are looking kind of further down the cascade. It's almost like a chess chess match. You guys watch Queen's Gambit, right? And how they're always like playing 2 steps ahead and that sort of thing. And the Buddhists are kind of approaching life in this way. It's thinking about, if I do this, what will happen? How did I get here? How can I redirect this? How can I play this game a little more skillfully and watch the various steps of dependent origination as they unfold? Now, again, Nirvana is the end of suffering. It's liberation from suffering, the utter cessation of craving, withdrawal from it, renunciation of it. So yeah, just like Stephen said, it's the end of these negative desires and then the end of the suffering that comes from them. There's Nirvana in this life, which the Buddha achieved when he was a young man at the age of 35. And then there is the final Nirvana, which he achieved when he was an old man at the age of 80, which of course means he passed away. So we actually will not see most of his life. We're basically going to jump to his death. And it's not because we're skipping anything. That's just the way the story is told. We read, there's a chapter on teaching, and they talked about the Four Noble Truths. It's the first teaching, and he actually goes over it pretty in some detail, maybe not a ton of detail. And then we get the growth of the Sangha, and there's a bunch of other Buddhist teachings that we're going to come back to later in the semester. But yeah, the Buddha's career in brief. So it's basically just a few pages, they cover more than half of his life. And then finally, chapter 12 is the death, which we'll read next time. So final Nirvana next time, Nirvana in this life this time. Yeah, after somebody died or after somebody achieves enlightenment, there is this question, what happens to them? Sort of a hard question to answer, right? And you might be wondering that too. Like, if I'm going to sign up for this whole Buddhism thing, I want to know where this is going, right? Can you give me some assurance? Am I going to heaven? Am I going to like see my friends up there or whatever? And of course, the answer to that is no. And the response you get in Kyon, kind of based on old Buddhist scriptures, is asking about the whereabouts of an enlightened one after death is like asking where a flame goes when it's blown out. How does that make sense? So of course, when you blow out a flame, it's just sort of not there anymore, right? Didn't really go anywhere. But what does that have to do with enlightenment? Can you guys make sense of that, Stephen?
I mean, like, well, it's sort of hard to put it in words, but it's like thinking about it is like when you can't really like see it anymore, it's like harder to like. I mean, well, when you blow out a fire, I mean, like scientifically speaking, it probably becomes like one with like the air.
Okay.
So maybe like it's sort of like everywhere. It's sort of like ambiguous. You can't really put a pin on like this is exactly what it is. Like it has some sort of flexibility with what it could be.
Well, so what is fire scientifically speaking? So like if you light a candle, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but the oils in the candle are combusting, and it's a release of energy in the form of light and heat. Does that sound about right? And so when you blow out a candle, it's just putting out the flame, right? It's just putting out that combustion, taking away the light and heat. And so it really is almost like an annihilation. It's a disappearance. It's just gone, right? Flames are dynamic, right? Maybe that's one word we can kind of hold on to as we think about this metaphor here. What is being argued is your existence right now is a lot like a flame. Your existence right now is dynamic. Now, it's not quite as simple as the combustion of oils on a wick, right? But at the same time, if we take these Buddhist ideas very seriously, what is it that is fueling the flame to keep us here? What is it? What is the cause of our existence, basically, according to the Buddhists? It is desire, right? It's these emotions. It's what keeps us here. The beginning of that cascade of events is ignorance. It's these negative emotions that just keep us stuck in this cyclic existence. And once you root those out, there is no fuel for the fire. The fire is gone, and so is existence. Now, I don't want to overstate it, right? It's not to say that the Buddha just totally disappears. It's total annihilation. It's total nothingness, because the Buddhists quickly kind of bring it back and say, well, that's not the case. And in fact, later Buddhists go on to say that the Buddha, in fact, does exist. And we have a relationship with it. We go to 35, right? So we got 2 minutes. 2 minutes, folks, 2 minutes. And so this is actually a very famous quote that asking about this final enlightenment is like a man who's been shot by a poison arrow asking like, hey, what kind of poison is this? And where was this arrow made? Like what this is great craftsmanship, is it? Check out this arrow, right? Now, why is this similar to somebody asking about these details of final enlightenment? Tyler? Yeah. If you're shot by a poison arrow, there's one question. How the hell do I get this out of me, right? It's like, how do I deal with the immediate situation, right? And the Buddha is saying, you guys are suffering, deal with that, right? Don't worry about what happens after the suffering is over. Just deal with the current situation. That's the initial message. Now, it's unsatisfying, though, and scholars within the Buddhist tradition come up with lots and lots of answers to this question. So we'll see some different answers. And in fact, the version of the book that we're reading would answer this very differently, right? They would say that the Buddha always has, always is, and always will be the cosmos. Remember that, right? So the Buddhists kind of rewrite this question, but the early Buddhists, the later Buddhists, I should say, rewrite it. The early Buddhists say he just kind of is gone. All right, it is 35. We are done. We did the whole class this time, guys. Look at us. We should be